This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, the very best comic book podcast for regular comic book fans. I'm your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week, two finalists of this year's IRCB Hunger Games, Kate Scotchless.
Hello.
And Nick White.
As long as I'm Jennifer Lawrence, I won't complain.
Perfect. Kate, you're PETA. I'm sorry. That's just how the cards fell.
Team Gale. Team Gale.
All right, well, we'll see. But before we get into the show and argue any further about the Hunger Games, God, that could be an entire episode in itself. I just want to remind folks, this is the last episode of the year that we're recording. We do have two fun minisodes that are coming next week. They're going to be really cool. Kate and Paul and Zach put together some really fun things. I can't wait for you guys to listen because, from my understanding, they're very, very goofy, outside of comic book discussion episodes. So I hope you have fun with them. But I want to remind everybody that we are going to Emerald City Comic Con. IRCB is going to be there. We're going to be live. We're going to be getting together with folks and hanging out and talking comics and showing off the comics that we bought all weekend. It's going to be great. So make sure if you're interested, get your plane ticket, get your hotel, get your ticket to the show. Make sure you can come meet us. We're going to be posting all the details of what we're going to be doing there as we get closer to the actual convention itself. And the other thing I want to say is that next year is episode 400. We're going to be hitting 400 official episodes of I Read Comic Books, which is an unbelievable achievement that I don't think that 25-year-old Mike, when he started this podcast, would think that would actually happen. So that's crazy. We're going to be doing a live episode on Twitch for that episode. We're going to be talking about the Goodreads book of the month as picked by the folks on Goodreads. So make sure you pay attention to stuff over there. And we're going to be doing a mailbag episode. And we're going to be talking about whatever the hell we're going to be doing, basically talking about the last year of I Read Comic Books. It's going to be a huge episode. It's all going to be live on Twitch, so you can see our beautiful faces. It's going to be me and Zach and Danny and Nick. I think that's the lineup that we have right now. It's going to be a whole organization. I don't even know what we're going to be doing completely yet outside of the stuff I just threw out there. So get ready for that. And if you want to send us an email, you want to send us a message that you want to have us talk about or ask us questions or whatever, send us an email at ircbpodcast@gmail.com, and we will talk about whatever you send us on that episode within reason. So make sure to send us an email. It's going to be really, really fun. For now, though, I've got to ask two legally mandated questions, and that is, how have you been? How have comic books been? I guess we're going to start with you, Nick.
Yeah, what a way to kick things off. Just a real sigh of resignation. I guess we got to start with you. That's fine. Yeah, things have been fine. West Michigan Weather Watch, we're under a winter weather warning, so that's a winter weather warning for the West Michigan Weather Watch. Sounds like I'm in a Dr. Seuss book at this point.
Yeah. That's like a Doctor Who thing, really.
Yeah. Don't ask me to talk about any of the rest of it. I know Matt Smith is in it. That's fine. Yeah, so that happens tonight. Very excited. Maybe we'll get some snow. Other than that, just nervously trying to get all of my Christmas shopping done down to the wire. So that's, capitalism, that jolly old man. Thank you so much, Santa. And beyond that, I paid $50 last night to watch the Lions game, which... that's what happens when, thank you, NFL, for locking us out from watching that game. So I now have NFL Plus for the rest of the year. I guess I'll have to try to make use of that.
Wait, you only have NFL Plus until the end of 2023?
No. It's a full calendar year. So
okay.
Yeah. Believe me, I know exactly what you're thinking, Nick. You didn't buy this for 3 weeks. No. I
mean, that's the thing, though, with sports, the way that they do sports streaming and all of the weird limitations and like the way they do blacking out of different games, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like, you have to buy it for the calendar year, and once the year ends, you have to buy it again on January 1st because they could. Just because they could, right? The greed has no end when it comes to sports.
Sports licensing is just so bonkers. And with this game, if you lived immediately in the Detroit region, for some reason they got the game local access, but the rest of us had to use Fubo TV, whatever that is, or
definitely didn't put malware on your computer to watch it, right?
Yeah, I just binged Fubo and then just downloaded whatever it said, and I don't know what's going on, but my computer hasn't worked for 3 days, so.
But you got to watch the Lions play sports, and that's what's important, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Beyond that, I did manage to read some books, so I'll just beat you to the punch on that one. Maybe for the first time. I'm 1 for 10 at this point. Xander, if you want to put up a Nick White, beating Mike to the punch on discussing comics stat line, just audio commentary.
Yeah, put that up for all of our
1 for
audio
10
listeners. Yeah.
I'll even do the math. That's 10%. So I read Our Bones Dust. Number 1, I know a couple people on the show have read this book. And yes, that is the title. No, there's no punctuation. No, there aren't any other words in it. What does it mean? It was very clear to me. It was you finished the book, and it'll be clear. So
Uh-huh.
this is written and drawn by Ben Stenbeck, with colors by Dave Stewart, letters by Russ Wooten. If you aren't familiar with Stenbeck's name, I can't blame you. It just probably means that you're not like really well versed in the Mike Mignola aesthetically adjacent cohort group. I'm talking like Max Fiumara, Duncan Fegredo, Lawrence Campbell, Stenbeck. Sorry, wow, we're getting into some real historical novelists here now. Stenbeck drew the first half of Baltimore. He drew the Frankenstein Underground miniseries, and he also recently drew the Hellboy, the Silver Lantern Club miniseries, amongst other things. Not surprised that in terms of having Dave Stewart on colors and Russ Wooten on letters, you basically have more or less the just constant, two people that are on more or less any Mike Mignola book. So they came along for the ride. That's great. Like, at the very least, this book is going to be a pretty one from that point.
Right.
And yeah, at the beginning, that's kind of what I had to cling to. I was starting to read this book and I was like, oh boy, just another post-apocalyptic narrative. Like, everybody's trying to murder each other over a bottle of Dasani, and everybody's horribly disfigured, and just oodles of scars, and people are just eviscerating other people for saying the wrong thing, and worshiping skulls that are part of some cult. And I'm like, okay, like, I mean, fine. But then the book takes this weird little twist where you
Don't
have the
don't spoil it too much,
yeah,
though.
no,
Don't spoil it too
no,
much.
this isn't like, I'll be careful. Famous last words, Nick White.
Nick, I swear to God, Nick, we've been doing this show for 400 episodes, and I swear to
I'm not
God,
gonna fool me again. No,
the number of times you've said no spoilers, don't
no
worry, and then
spoilers.
completely spoiled the book
Yeah.
is in the dozens. Okay.
Yeah, but Xander, put up the stat line on that too, please.
Yeah, please.
What's my percentage? No, I will describe what happens at the outset of the book, and we will leave it there. So you have these. I don't know what they are. Are they robots? Are they aliens? Are they humans? Are they from the future? What? Who knows what they are? But you've got these creatures that have come down to what appears to be Earth, and they're going through different things on Earth, and they're looking through all the different like remnants of technology that have been strewn around the planet, and they're looking at the satellites in space and trying to read information from them. And they're like, well, I don't really think there's much else here, we might as well leave. But one of them goes down to the planet and starts following some of the action that happens around. And I think that that's really what helps put this book firmly into the like, where is this book going? Who are these things? What are they doing? What is their goal? Why are they interested in this silent protagonist who like stole a bottle of water and now he's got this gang coming after him? I think it adds such a good amount of interesting questions that propel this book out of the terrible people doing terrible things to other terrible people because somebody wants a drink of water, which is already happening in modern society, so not that much of a departure, I guess.
Nick the optimist.
Yeah.
It's I think you're totally right though with this book, because the thing is, anybody can do a dystopian, it's the end of the world, Mad Max style, we're running out
And
of gas,
these
we're running out
days,
of
it feels
water.
even more well-worn, right?
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very overdone, and I think that Stenbeck, excuse me, has I know, it's the same thing. Stenbeck has done something to say, I'm going to take that idea and I'm going to twist it enough to where I add an extra interesting piece of this. This is what we need in this type of genre. Like, we're going to do crazy, wild, dystopian bullshit, whatever, but there's another layer here that adds a whole different set of intrigue to the story that made me super excited for issue 2. Like, I'm so jazzed for how this issue ended, to be like, I have no choice but to pick up this next issue. And I think that's how you do a good indie miniseries that's going to hopefully conclude in a way that is satisfying. I don't care at this point. Like, number 2 is coming home with me one way or another, because I gotta know what happens with these folks.
Yeah, and I think I always appreciate when you have artists that shift over to writing,
Hmm.
that they don't try to get superly ambitious and be like, look at me, I can do, how do I put this? Um,
How do you put this without calling someone out, Nick? Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, I think sometimes when people switch over, they like try to like really prove that they're this big writer and they're going to use a whole bunch of words and they're going to do a whole bunch of things. When in fact, most artists that have been artists for a long time, like they've already mastered storytelling, visual storytelling with as few or as minimalist words as needed. I
Right.
think that they've already figured that out, and so when you flip over, like go strength to strength, like do what you know how to do. And I think having a book where I'm pretty sure, is this a spoiler, the main character I think says something or borderline nothing,
Yeah.
and the
Almost
book's
nothing.
dialogue is sparse, it's efficient, it's to the point. This book doesn't get hyper wordy because somebody goes, well, I guess I'm writing the book now, so I better write a really big book. No different than when you have novelists who are new to comic books and they decide that they're going to write a comic book and it gets hyper wordy and it's
Hmm.
just, well, I better fill the page, right? It's like, well, I
Yeah.
better fill the page syndrome. And
But Steinbeck does not do this at all. That's what you're saying.
Stenbeck.
Steinbeck. Oh my
This guy did
God.
not write Travels with Charlie.
Right, right, right.
Um,
Steinbeck does not do this in his book.
yeah.
Um,
Anyway, this guy wrote The Grapes of Wrath in his free time several decades ago, so he's just a remarkably resilient individual.
anyways,
Uh,
Nick, please wrap up this talk about this book. We have to
yeah.
move on.
Please wrap it up before one of us accidentally attributes more novels to his name.
Yes, please.
Um, Look, it's a beautiful book. It's an exciting book. It has intriguing questions, and it looks fucking great. I almost feel like I don't have to say that just because the art team is so solid, but it
Hmm.
looks so good. And Stenbeck absolutely nails what I'm pretty sure is his first writing job by just sticking to his strengths, and the
Hmm.
visual storytelling is so good.
Absolutely. Everybody that I've recommended this book to has turned around and said, "Oh my God, how did I not know about this book? Thank you so much," because it is that good of a book. So, yeah, I'm totally on board with what you're saying here, Nick. Let's move on really quick. Kate, how have you been? How have comic books been?
I've been good. I haven't been as highbrow as Nick. Not reading any great American icons. But I picked up Gideon Falls Volume 1, The Black Barn
Uh huh.
from the
Uh huh.
library. And this is something that's been on my to read list for several years. I want to say since it first started in 2018. So it's been a minute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is the book by Jeff Lemire, Andrea Sorrentino, and Dave Stewart. And the volume 1 is the first 6 issues. So I went into this knowing almost nothing other than it's a creepy rural mystery urban horror kind of book. And I loved it. The art obviously is gorgeous. You know that going in with an Andrea Sorrentino book. But it's this really interesting um mix of two perspectives. You have one point of view character that is living in a big city and is theoretically mentally ill, having these hallucinations of a black barn that is evil, and he's going around picking through trash and working with his therapist, and who thinks this is all psychosis. And then on the other hand, you have a fallen from grace priest who's trying to make a comeback after getting his alcoholism under control and is sent to this small town where horrible things start to happen. And of course, he's the initial suspect because he has this essentially rap sheet with the cops, and is the new person in town. And this back and forth between these two unreliable narrators, as you get drawn more and more into this essentially conspiracy theory, you're getting more and more into it as they are, and same with like the
Mm.
individual's therapist, where more and more you're like, wait, are they crazy? Like, is this is this a thing? I loved it, and the art does such a good job of giving you that unbalanced feeling and that kind of topsy turvy, what is real, what is not kind of thing, and just being very spooky. I did not expect the trippy stuff that comes. I don't want to spoil anything, but it
Hmm.
takes a turn that is not at all what I was expecting, which I really, really enjoyed. And I'm really hoping it stays this good, because this seems like my next series to plow through because my library had all 6 books sitting there on the shelf. So that's my
Nice.
plan this afternoon before the bad weather hits, is to run into town and pick up the next 5.
Kate's Kate's
Go
like, I
ahead,
know
Nick.
it's about the
Shatter my
storm.
dreams.
No, I feel like you're just like, hey, you know, it's about the snow and I'm about to be locked inside my house. What better to read other than one of the scariest books to be published from Image
Yeah.
in a few years?
Oh
You'll have to
man.
let us know how that goes, Kate, because hopefully you will keep internet because you'll have to keep us updated in the group chat.
Oh, we for sure will lose power if what happens. We're supposed to, assuming that it happens. So we're supposed to get 50-mile-an-hour winds, which our shitty rural
Oh,
infrastructure means no power for at least 10 hours. So we're doing the whole like
oof.
bring out the blankets and generator and
Right, right, right,
your lands, which is part of why I want to get physical books, because eventually your iPad dies in those times. So
right, 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 right. Well, one way or another, hopefully we hear from you, and I'm excited to hear what you think of the rest of Gideon Falls. Well, let me talk a little bit about how I've been and such, and some books that I've been reading. Yesterday was Pokemon Community Day, the first of 2 days, because we are wrapping up 2023 with a 2-day Pokemon Go event, from 2 to 5 today and yesterday, as of recording on Sunday. They're revisiting all of the previous community days of the year, and yesterday I got 19 shinies and 2 4-star Pokemon. And for those of you that out there that know what I'm talking about, high five, you're cool. Everyone else, you're dumb and you suck. So I had a pretty fun day yesterday, just driving around in my car, walking around the park, listening to podcasts and catching Pokemon, because that's how you're supposed to spend your Saturdays in December, as far as I'm concerned. Go outside and go for a walk and catch Pokemon. But I did read some comic books. I got in the mail recently a copy of this book that I backed on Kickstarter called Try Not to Die. This is the first issue of a 5-issue series, if I'm not mistaken. This is by Damian Becton with art by Kenneth Laster, letters by Reed Hinckley Barnes. I'll post a link to the Kickstarter in the show notes. But essentially, the story is 5 people are abducted after apparently dying in classic horror movie moments, and they wind up in this weird limbo state where they have to survive their murders once again or be the last one standing. It's a little confusing, but the idea is there's like this Hellraiser Cenobite alien monster that has essentially brought these people into a limbo space, and for entertainment purposes they're reliving their murders, but if they survive them in the reliving state, they will survive, but all 5 of them are experiencing it once. It's a really weird concept that I was kind of not bought in on until the end of the issue had a really interesting twist that I said, oh, there's like another layer of like interesting bits that's happening on this book. Not in the same way that Our Bones Dust has it, where there's like actually a cool third layer. It's mostly the twist with one of the characters I did not see coming, and I really, really like the way that this book is going. Plus, it feels like Hellraiser, and I'm always on board for someone at least trying to do something like that. I listened to a podcast recently where they were talking about Hellraiser 2, and I was like, oh man, that movie is so stupid. It fucking rules. And that's what I kind of got out of this book. It's kind of an absurd concept, but it is well executed and it's super well lettered. I do want to call out the lettering in this book as being something that really immersed me in driving the way that I was following the comic. And I feel like some books try to do that, where they try to guide you through the pages with lettering and it sometimes doesn't work. This book had a really wild circular layout on like a 2-page spread, and the lettering got me from place to place in a way that I feel like many books who have tried to do that super duper can't do it very well. So I don't know, really like this book. The first issue was pretty pricey. It was like $13 for the physical copy, but it was only $4 or $5 for the first issue digitally. So like, I feel like that's the right pricing for an indie Kickstarter where there's only like 2,000 or 1,000 copies being made.
yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty good. Really high quality print when I got the book. It was very well packaged, came with a really cool sticker. The design on this series is really, really cool. There's one thing that I think a lot of comic books don't get, especially in the indie scene sometimes, on Kickstarter, and books that I've backed and books that I've decided not to back because of this. But the design of your book, the layout of the cover, the logo that you use really, really can help drive the cool factor of your book. And I'm not saying that a good story is dictated by a cool logo, because we know, we've read plenty of comic books with really cool logos and they stink. But I will say, from like a perspective of a potential person who wants to crowdfund a comic, a cool logo will get me to at least read through your comic book Kickstarter. So just throwing that out there for folks that may be listening. But yeah, this is a really cool book. I can't wait for number 2. So Try Not to Die number 2 is probably coming out, I think, in 2024. If you can, I would say get on the information list for this book, because I really think this is a killer book coming out from Kickstarter, or from these creators on Kickstarter. So Nick, talk about one more book real quick, and I want to talk about one more too, because I read another big, huge book.
Okay. Well, apparently I've got a type. This is really going to step outside my comfort zone for sure. And by step outside my comfort zone, I mean this book literally has the same colorist and literally the same letterer as the previous book I just discussed.
You know what you're about.
Exactly. I have a type, folks, and that type is Giant Robot Hellboy number 2. Look, here's this book again. Here it is again.
So you went from Hellboy creators on an independent book to a Hellboy book. Okay, Nick.
Let's go back to the source, guys. Let's go back to the source. There's a through line here.
Okay.
Nick, you talked about this book maybe a month ago. Is it basically the exact same thing? Yeah, who cares? Like, people need to hear more about this. Look, if I don't stand up for Hellboy, if Mike Mignola does not have me in his corner, then who does this poor man who has had three movies to his name, who does he turn to in this time of need?
20 plus years of success in the comic industry. Whatever will Mike Mignola do?
Look, I gotta stand up for these indie creators, okay?
Oh my God, Nick, tell us about Giant Robot Hellboy 2, please.
Yeah, okay. Look, story by Mike Mignola. We've talked about this. That story is probably a 30-second voice message that he put on the artist's phone. Art by Duncan Fegredo. Letters by Dave Stewart. Letters by Clem Robbins. Look, it's just another issue of a giant robot that looks like Hellboy fighting a monster who is certainly not based on Godzilla for legal reasons. And Mike Mignola probably thinks to himself, well, how do I outdo that? And then true inspiration, wherever true inspiration comes from, it arrives. And that's when the titular Neon Genesis Trenchcoat Demon, I'm being witty here, that's Giant Robot Hellboy, in a move reminiscent of a late 1990s Mike Myers-led film, launched missiles out of his erect robotic nipples. Hopefully, that's the first time and the last time I say that turn of phrase on this podcast.
What the hell?
It's a very hell yeah moment that you then pause and think about for a few seconds afterwards.
I'm just going to say that for the folks on Patreon who get our show notes, you will be able to read that verbatim in this week's show notes. So support us on Patreon to get access to these raw notes.
Podcast notes after dark. Does this issue offer up more monsters? Absolutely. Does the mecha have even more weapons? Of course. The action ramps up, Fegredo's art looks even better than ever, and the mysterious B-plot only gets more intriguing. Maybe to a point, it's hinted at that Jesse Lonergan's recent Hellboy-verse efforts from earlier this year with Miss Truesdale and the Fall of Hyperborea may be tied into this book, which is such a weird little discovery. That will make sense for about 2 people.
Right. And you love it, though. That's the piece that you left off there, right?
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. It's super exciting. Like, I did not think I was going to see very small little snippet of Jesse Lonergan's art somehow end up in this book. And yet it does. I won't say anything more on that. Okay. This book continues to be an absolute visual delight. And as I already said, haha, so weird. Dave Stewart again, Clem Robbins again. Like, they're on loaner from Mike Mignola. Like, Mike unshackles them from the table where they work misery style in the basement and says, you have to go work for Ben this month. But don't get too attached, because I need you to come back here because I need help, because the only person who advocates for me regularly is Nick White, and God bless him. And what would I do without him? Mike,
Yeah.
put that on the back of your next trade. What would I do without him?
Yeah.
Parentheses, Nick White, close parentheses.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll
Please
make sure
do
to
it.
send a letter out to Dark Horse about that. Well, let me talk about one more book really quick before we move into the top of our pile. I also read I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. This is written and drawn and completely put together by Tom Scioli. If you don't know, Tom Scioli did another unofficial comic very much like this, because this book is not sanctioned by the Stan Lee estate, is not sanctioned by by Marvel Comics, not sanctioned by anybody, right? Like, I believe this is published semi-independently beyond any major publisher. So Scioli puts out this beautiful little hardcover about Jack Kirby a couple years back, about Jack Kirby's life, which to me felt like a more focused biography than this Stan Lee one. But I feel like this book intentionally tried to get through a lot of Stan Lee's life as fast as possible in order to talk about some of the major issues and major celebrations of Stan Lee's life later that happened in like his 40s and 50s, but had to add all of this baseline to explain how Stan Lee rose from just a kid who was working in the Timely Comics like news office. And before they even called Timely Comics, there was another name, the magazine company that published these comics. He worked as like kind of a nobody and eventually rose to be the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. And it's an incredible journey. And I think maybe a lot of us know this. Maybe a lot of us have read other stories about this, because I will say Scioli cited the hell out of this book. Like, there's at least 3 pages of citations to go through where he found all this information, as well as to add like he adds a prelude to the book that says like, hey, some of this is kind of inferred based off of conversations. None of this can actually be taken as complete fact, but I try my best to basically try to put a whole story together here to explain Stan Lee's entire life. And so I don't know, this book was really wild because the way that Scioli told things, he basically leaves no breathing room, right? Like, scenes will bleed into each other without leaving any breathing room, and years seem to pass between panels. Stan will be talking to someone in panel 1, and then in panel 3, he's talking to a different person, some famous artist that maybe you've never heard of, right? Or you've definitely heard of, I should say. Like, he'll be talking to Kirby, then Steve Ditko, then, name a dozen other famous Marvel artists, John Romita Jr., John Romita Sr., I should say. Yeah, it's a wild book that tries to get through time as quickly as possible without leaving out details that were probably crucial, small conversations that led to major impacts. Like, why did Jack Kirby not actually work on Spider-Man? Well, there was this up-and-coming guy named Steve Ditko that Stan Lee had met in college, or when Steve Ditko was in college, and said, hey, we need somebody to do this Spider-Man book. Why don't you give it a shot? And then Ditko ends up, running the freaking show for the first dozen issues or however long he ran it. So it's really interesting the way at which Scioli approaches this story, again, to try to get to these major points as fast as possible, because it's only 184 pages long. And I really can't begrudge Scioli for speeding through things, because I feel like it gets through to every point, and it gets to the major pieces and moments that are actually like defining for Stan Lee's life in the, I would say, like, more modern history of things, right? Stan Lee in the 70s and 80s, and when he had this big falling out with Marvel, when he tried to get ownership of all of these characters, then he started doing cameos in movies, and there are these big fallout moments where he was doing a TV show and he had like people on this show, like things that I didn't know about but seemed to be extremely like life-changing for him in ways that were both beneficial and detrimental, right? Like, I don't know, like, this book does not shy away from the brighter and the darker moments. Like, it's very the truth, warts and all, about Stan Lee, even in the end of his life. Like, this whole mishap and mishandling, and TMZ and all the various like tabloid articles talking about his family life and how it wasn't working. Like, after his wife died, it seems like everything fell apart for him. And I think some of us remember there was that video that came out of Stan Lee talking about how he was of stable mind, and
Yeah.
like, Scioli covers all of this stuff like in a way that is almost like grossly honest, but like it would be almost a harm to the story and the harm to the story of Stan Lee's life to change it in any way. So I don't know. I like the way that Scioli went through this book, but again, it feels super rushed. And I feel like if you weren't someone like, me, or someone like, I'm sure you listening like to this episode, and you know all of these things about comic book history, or you've heard these names, you might be a little lost. Like, I think if I gave this to a non-comic reader, they wouldn't get a third of it, because there are just names thrown out there with no citations of like who this person is, what the relevancy is. Something that I feel like a creator like Box Brown does better in their series, where they add little footnotes as to why this
Yeah.
person is important to the story and who they are in relation to the greater story at hand. And again, this isn't stories so much as, you know, the real life of these people's or the real story of these people's lives, but nonetheless, names are kind of just thrown willy-nilly, I think, with an understanding that you know who they are. And I think, if you weren't like a deep college comic reader, you might be losing some of this. So I don't know. It's an interesting book. I will say I think the Jack Kirby book is better, because I think it's more focused, and maybe Jack Kirby's life was maybe a little bit easier to understand, because Stan Lee did live this humongous bombastic life, interacting with all sorts of different things. And I think, especially near the end of the book, where you hear about him cameoing in all these movies and how he's making money just to make sure that him and his wife and his daughter are fine. It's a really interesting thing to see that side of things. Like, why did Stan Lee do all of those movies? Is it just an homage, or was like he trying to just keep money coming in, because all of his endeavors that he had later in life, like, just didn't pan out, right? I don't know. It's interesting, but I do think the Jack Kirby book is better. Regardless, these books look amazing side by side on my shelf. It's nice to have a big book that says Jack Kirby, and then right next to it's I Am Stan. Like, something about that just is really, really cool. So I would say give this book a shot, but know that it's going to feel a little weird. But I think that's kind of its charm, is that it feels dreamy in the same way that I feel like Stan Lee's life was kind of too big to be real. So I don't know. That's my final summation on it.
Do you feel it's pretty even keeled? Because I can't help but find it so interesting that, you know, Scioli being I think heavily inspired by Jack Kirby would be a
Mm-hmm.
massive understatement.
Yeah.
I think that obviously, like, I think for Scioli, Jack Kirby is probably maybe the largest singular, you know, inspiration.
Yeah.
Just especially just visually, look at all of his work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fascinating to have someone like that suddenly writing this book
Yeah.
about, I mean, nemesis is not the correct
Yeah.
word, but it's like, you know, this oppositional force, I guess.
Well, especially given the unpleasant history between Kirby and Stanley, right? Like,
Yeah, 100%.
I think this book is pretty honest, right? I think that the Kirby book, like the Jack Kirby book, takes the stance, I think, of Jack Kirby, where he said, you know, those characters were mine and they were stolen from me, right? And I think the Stan Lee book takes Stan's stance, which is we were co-creators. We worked on these things together. I created a lot of this stuff, and sometimes these artists. And what I think is really interesting is that the book, Stan's story changes over time in the book, right? And I think that's because
Yeah,
Stan's story
interesting.
changed over time in real
Mm-hmm.
life, where he
Mm-hmm.
went from, oh, we were co-creators. We would talk about it, and then they would go and draw it, and I would come back and put words on it. And then eventually later in life, he'd say, I'd write up a description, I'd tell them what they wanted to put in the comic book, and then Jack would draw it, and then I'd put the words on top of it. So like his story, while doesn't feel different in the way that he tells it, is clearly a different story by the end of his life, right? When he was trying to get these characters back, when he was trying to say, oh, Stan Lee was the creator of all of this stuff, his story changes just enough to make it seem like he was the creator. Whereas it feels like in the 70s and the 60s, he was talking, the way that he would talk about these characters is like, oh, we worked on them together. It was a collaborative process. We both created this thing. So I think that Scioli is honest about that and doesn't shy away from, I think, adhering to what Stan said in life, right? Like, I don't think that he takes the side of Kirby in a lot of ways. I think he takes the
Mm-hmm.
side of he tries to depict the story how Stan told it. So yeah, it feels like it skews more towards like, oh, Stan is actually the owner. But if you read the book, it's pretty clear that like Stan believed that he was collaborators, and then eventually turned it into, no, I own these things because I came up with the idea. But that's not just because of the comics. That was the way that he thought about most things. If I was the idea person, therefore I own it. Yeah,
Gotcha.
again, you should read the book, because I do think, one, it's a quick read. I feel like some Scioli books take days. This book I sat down and read in a sitting, and it was very enjoyable. It's very engaging, and I think that almost dreamlike state of the way that the book tells its story helps with that a lot. So enough about that. Go read this book. It's very good. Maybe again, the Kirby book is better, but they're both great books. And let's move on. Let's talk about comics on the top of our pile. Comics that are new or old or just something you're trying to get off of your shelf. Let me see. Let me talk about some of the folks that are hanging out with us on Discord first, though. Hugh is going to be reading Rare Flavors #3, which I can't wait for that book too. Is almost the top of my pile this week. Danny's going to be reading Animal Pound #1. I have no idea what that is. Danny, tell us about it in the chat. And Paul G is going to be reading Glitch #2. Kate, let's bounce back over to you. What is on the top of your pile this week?
For me, the top of my pile is OGN called British Ice by Owen D. Pomeroy. It's an Arctic noir mystery. I don't know. It sounds like maybe this started out on Comixology Submit. Is that true?
Okay, so the only reason I bring that up is because I feel like years ago, Nick sent me this book and was like, you got to check this out. Or it was like always on sale or something like that. And little did I know that years later, Nick would still be sending me this guy's art. And as I said in an episode recently, he bullied me into buying this Kickstarter. Not really. But yeah, I did get his recent book, Owen D. Pomeroy's book, The Hard Switch, as well as a copy of his book, Victory Point. So, Kate, all I was noting there in our notes is that you're gonna have a good time because Pomeroy's art is absolutely stunning.
So the art is what made me blind draw it off the shelf at the library, where it is this beautiful pencil art with all blue-gray tones. And so it works really well, at least from, obviously I haven't read this yet, so I say works well in terms of flipping through the pages for a few minutes at the library for like an Arctic setting. And it's about a whistleblowing diplomat who is kind of grappling with the legacy of colonialism at this far outpost and caught between kind of the hostile locals and the British government and this unforgiving physical landscape. He's finding dark secrets and yada yada, all the noir-y sorts of things. I, well, say it with me now, love the seasonally appropriate reads, and this looks like the perfect January book.
Yes.
It's all snowy and gorgeous. I also just really like the kind of historical mystery / noir reads about various places that I'm not particularly familiar with. So this just sounds right up my alley and looks beautiful. So I'm excited for this. How about you guys?
Nice. I never read this book. I think I own a copy. I don't know if I still have access to it. RIP Comixology forever. But yeah, I'll have to look for it. But this looks beautiful. I mean, it's Owen D. Pomeroy, and I think we are obsessed with this creator on this podcast now. But let me talk about a book really quick that's on the top of my pile. I also picked a seasonally appropriate comic book, Kate.
Hell yeah, Mike.
For once in my life. During the big Black Friday sale that Fantagraphics did a little while back, I decided to go ape shit. I don't know what my problem was this year, but I just went crazy. And I picked up a copy of Walt Disney's Donald Duck, A Christmas for Shacktown, the complete Carl Barks Disney volume #11. I don't know how Fantagraphics is collecting these books, but I feel like they're publishing them in like a weird order. This is volume 11, but according to their website, it's the second volume that they've published. So I don't know how that works. But nonetheless, this is Carl Barks doing Donald Duck comics. Sometimes, like I said, I get suckered into these books when Kara says, those Carl Barks books are the best. And, I just believe Kara at this point. Like anything she says is good. Come on. Especially when it comes to properties like this. Like, how do you look through the myriad of Disney comic books that have existed over the past, 100 years and say, which are the good ones? And it turns out Kara has read a lot of those and knows the good ones. So she recommended Carl Barks. I said, yeah, tried to get another book of his. It was sold out last year when they did a sale. And this year I saw that they had this other book and I was like, I'm going to get this hopefully in time for Christmas so I can actually read it. And I figure though this book collects not only the titular 32-page story, but apparently a bunch of other well-loved classic Donald Duck stories that involve the entire Duck clan, including Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and Scrooge McDuck. And quite honestly, Scrooge McDuck is maybe one of my favorite, villainous friendly characters who's like a piece of shit rich guy who's just so rich it's absurd. I, for some reason, find that to be absolutely hilarious. The same way that I find Dr. Doom to be the best villain because he's so absurd in what he is and what he does. So what I'm saying is that Scrooge McDuck is the Victor Von Doom of the Disney universe. Can't wait for that matchup when those two have to fight each other in the eventual Disney v Marvel crossover event that's probably coming in 2027. But yeah, I'm very excited though, because this is the beginning of me actually climbing the mountainous pile of comics that I have sitting at my house that need to be read, because I'm telling myself that, with rare exception, in 2024, I'm not going to buy any new comic books. I'm putting it out here to the world to say this live on the podcast. So call me out when you see this not happening. But I'm not going to buy any new comic books, except for, there's those things that you like can't ever get, right? Like a Kickstarter, for instance, maybe, but not a lot of them. I'm going to cut back on my Kickstarters. But like, I'm going to still keep collecting things like Saga, Enfield Gang, Ice Cream Man, things that are like part of the regular rotation of things. But like, until I read all of these goddamn comic books in my house, this is not the digital library yet. We haven't gotten there. That's a 2025 problem. All of the physical books in my house must be read before I really start to get into new comics. So yeah, that's what I'm doing this year. And this Donald Duck book is one of them. I've got a Mickey Mouse book. I've got a dozen other Fantagraphics books that I bought. The Tenacious D comic book that came out that was apparently written and drawn by Tenacious D. I didn't even know that was a thing, but apparently I got it. Yeah, so don't worry, folks. It's just me trying to save some money and maybe read some comic books. But nonetheless, I'm trying to stick to it. This is the beginning of that. And I hope it's worth it. We'll see. Everyone's all right. Listen, if you're going to call me out in the chat like that, I'm going to kick you all off of Discord. Let's take a quick break. No, I'm just kidding. Nick, tell us about what book you read next before we go into the break.
I mean, I gotta hand it to you. I'm pretty sure you just shattered your 2024 resolution before it even started, but
hey,
that's fine. Yeah, my pick for this week, let me say this. Sometimes we read things for the weirdest reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And my pick for this week, Hunt for the Skinwalker #4, is very much belonging to that camp. This is written by Zach Thompson, art by Valeria Burzo, colors by Jason Wardy, letters by Joe Sabino. I sort of anticipated that my Christmas shopping this year was going to continue to be the bane of my existence. So last weekend, I already started with some pre-podcast prep and started scouting the books coming out on December 20th. And I saw this book, and the title understandably stuck out. And I said, next thing I know, I'm looking up what the series is about, and it's like, hey, weird shit happens on this ranch in the mid-90s, and it might be about cryptids, and it might be aliens, and it might be both. And then I'm finding out that this book is apparently an adaptation of a 2005 nonfiction book titled Hunt for the Skinwalker, Science Confronts the Unexplained at a Remote Ranch in Utah.
Yeah.
So they just went ahead and they just chopped the subtitle off, because why would you put that on the front of a comic book?
To get people like me even more excited to pick up this freaking comic book. Duh.
Yeah, and then I find out this nonfiction book exists because, apparently, allegedly, this shit really happened.
Yeah, that's what nonfiction means, Nick. Come on.
Yeah. Put big quotes around "really happened," though, please, everyone.
I was
according to some
people.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you just put quotes around all of it. So additionally, the events of this were also recounted for a 2018 documentary titled Hunt for the Skinwalker. So the next thing I know, I'm reading the first 3 issues of this comic in a blur. And the next thing I know, I'm buying the fucking book that the comic is based on.
Yes.
Let me give you a short summary of this. Actually, it's not that short. Fuck. Quote, rarely do scientists have the opportunity to study and measure a recurring series of mysterious and inexplicable events in the field. So in 1996, a team of open-minded researchers from the National Institute for Discovery Science, founded and funded by Las Vegas businessman, there's a great thing, Robert Bigelow, jumped at the chance to investigate weird phenomena still occurring on a cattle ranch in Uinta County, Utah. Its owner had been plagued for the past 2 years by odd disappearances, manifestations of a shape-shifting entity the Ute Indians call a skinwalker, floating blue orbs of light, cattle mutilations, a giant wolf that seems unaffected by bullets, that's my favorite part, and a sinister hyena-like creature. Biochemist Kelleher tells a story of the team's experiences on the ranch as a, quote, ambitious if unconventional example of what science is supposed to do, explore the unknown. Admittedly, for me, I was really interested to see how the comics team attempted to basically truncate a 320-page book into roughly 120 pages of comics. I can't fully speak to the success of this as I haven't quite read the book yet, but the comic never had me feeling like I'd missed a bunch or was left out.
Sure.
Thompson isn't exactly one of my big favorite writers, but I like his work here. I absolutely loved Burzo's art on Castle Full of Blackbirds, which was a Hellboy verse title that came out about a year or so ago. And Jason Wordie, absolutely colorist legend, doesn't get enough credit.
Totally.
He's worked on such books as Kaya and Wasted Space within the last couple of years. And yeah, I was thinking about this, and I sort of like miss going back to like mid 90s conspiracy theories when it was like, hey, what if the government lied about aliens? Or hey, like, what if these cryptids really exist? And of course, conspiracy theories now are more like, gosh, are birds real? Flat Earth theory. And of course, with some of these things, you can say that the people who created them knew that they were fake, but it
Sure.
still says something about modern society that there are other people who have heard that admission and continue to believe in said things. So I just sort of yearn for mid 90s conspiracy theories. And if you want to, see me get on my soapbox, I think a lot of this has to do with like pre and post 9/11 media consumption, and also just sort of pre 9/11 media versus post 9/11 media, and sort of the things that you could say on like X-Files in the mid and late 90s, post 9/11, if you're like, hey, the government is lying to you about X, Y, and Z, people were busy watching 24 at that point, where, the Department of Homeland Security is now a thing.
To believe that they were lying would be a shattering of the universe.
Right, you can't do that.
Yeah,
You can't do that. So, so again, a little bit of a weird little tangent there, but it definitely had me yearning back to Mulder and Scully in those eras. And it's a weird, there's some weird shit. There was some weird shit that went on, and it's not easily explainable. And I'm totally interested and ready for issue 4, because what a ride that book has been.
Well, I didn't know that this book existed. I love the story of the Skinwalker Ranch just because of how mysterious and weird it is. I would recommend, if you want more on this from a podcast that I love, maybe you won't. It's called Last Podcast on the Left. You probably maybe have heard of it. They did an entire multi-part series about Skinwalker Ranch, which is a whole thing. This book that Nick was talking about, Hunt for the Skinwalker, the longer title, was one of the sources they used for that book, or for that series that they did. So if you want more, I think that's a great resource, I guess. But yeah, man, that's fun stuff. I freaking love conspiracy theory stuff. This is also why I love Department of Truth. I mean, like, come on, like, anyways, I'm glad. I did not know that this book existed, and I'm very glad I'm gonna buy it, even though I just told you guys I wasn't gonna buy new comics. So with that, we're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we're gonna forget that I said that, and talk about comics that we loved in 2023. We'll be back in just a second. For our show this week, we are talking about our 2023 comic book reading in review, some of our favorite books that we read in 2023. I'm going to be completely honest, though. You've probably heard me talk about all of these books on the show already, so if you are a dedicated, every single week reader or listener, I don't know if you read this show, maybe you just read transcripts, I don't know. You've probably heard us talk about some of these books, but we're going to go through them one more time in case this is your first ever episode of I Read Comic Books. Thank you for getting so far. We really appreciate it, because I've got to do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into things, and that is to say, I got to remind you, check us out on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Discord, Goodreads. We're still technically on Twitter, at least as long as the site is up. But we have a really fun, prolific Discord. That's great. And Goodreads. We have a YouTube channel that Danny puts together, which is amazing. So make sure to check all those links in the show notes. And as always, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/IRCB podcast, where you can get access to all of our wonderful series, such as IRCB Movie Club, Better Batmobile, Mike's X-Men Blind Box, Book versus Book, Giant Days of Our Lives, so many more, 100+ episodes of content that's just on Patreon. So make sure to check that out at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. So let's talk about comics of 2023, the books that we love the most, whether they came out in 2023 or not. I think we may have leaned a little bit more towards recency, but we'll see. So I guess to kick things off, I want to start with a book that I didn't think that I was going to like, and then it turns out that I loved, and that is Superman for All Seasons. This is by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. I know maybe you're out there screaming in your car or at home or whatever. Mike, how could you not think you were going to like Superman for All Seasons? It's one of the best. Honestly, Jeff Loeb, whenever I see that name on a comic book, I'm always hesitant unless it's a Long Halloween. So I don't know. I heard same team that did the Long Halloween. I really, really like this book. It's it's very similar to Batman: The Long Halloween, where we follow Superman for over a period of time. And I don't know. It's just one of those books that when I finished it, I said, "Oh no, this is exactly what Superman should be." I don't know if either of you read this book, but it's one of those old classics. Okay.
Yeah.
I recommend
years ago.
I recommend it. It's a 4-issue miniseries that follows Superman through the spring, summer, fall, and winter. And we get different narrators in each episode or each issue. First by Jonathan Kent, then by Lois Lane, then Lex Luthor, then by Lana Lang. And it's just a beautiful little book. Like, I don't even want to tell you about it other than to say, like, this is the story about how other people see Superman. And it's great. I don't know. It's a perfect little comic book. And it's Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, so it kind of looks and reads pretty well for when it came out at the time. So Nick, what about you? What's one of the books that's in the best of 2023 for you, or at least that you read in 2023?
Sure. So, I mean, let's just get this one out of the way because obviously I'm very biased. So we'll just bury this book right now and be done with it. Yeah, there were multiple contenders for best alien book of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Marvel did not make this easy. And again, I talk about how, future data scientists will never really be able to totally parse out the fucking metadata categorization mess that is comics.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean that in 2023, there were 3 books that came out called Aliens. There was Aliens... parentheses 2022 to 2023. There was Aliens just 2023, and there was Aliens 2023 to 2024. There's 3 of them. But for me, the one that I thought was really, really good was Aliens 2023. Just 2023. This was the beginning of Declan Shalvey's run with Andrea Braccardo on art. And for me, this is probably this is definitely the best alien book we've seen since Marvel acquired 20th Century Fox.
Interesting.
I think Shalvey is the best writer. No knock against Philip Kennedy Johnson. I thought his work was really good. I thought his first 2 arcs were much stronger than the third.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like Shalvey has a real knack for these characters, and I really appreciated the fact that Marvel took a risk or didn't care or tried to save money, whichever one it is. We don't know. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I want to say take a risk to just try to be positive and put they cast against type when it came to picking the artist, Andrea Braccardo.
Mm-hmm.
The artwork is brighter. The color palette is also brighter. And it just doesn't traditionally look like an alien book would look. I think if you look at Salvador Larroca being brought on when Philip Kennedy Johnson initially began his run, I think that art style, and obviously I have tons of thoughts about it, but that art style was what, quote unquote, people thought an alien book should look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have absolutely loved Shalvey's work. I think Braccardo is a fantastic artist. I believe Braccardo was brought back. There's only 1 issue out, so I can't remember exactly. Braccardo was brought back for Alien 2023 to 2024, which in my mind was a stellar choice. And really, really enjoying this book. Shalvey's doing a great job with that.
Hell yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah, I need to get caught up on this. This is a book that I have in some capacity. If not, I'll just check it out on Marvel Unlimited. But yeah, the Alien books have been pretty darn good since Marvel took over, which is a surprise to me. I don't know. I expected a pretty high bar for you, Nick, and you said that they were pretty interesting, which is like pretty much sign off that these books are going to be good, because I feel like your expectation of what the Alien franchise could be is pretty high up there. So the fact that you're saying this is better than Philip Kennedy Johnson's run, which I thought was amazing, is saying something to me.
Yeah, and I think part of the strength, and again, is this deliberately calculated decision making, or is it apathy? I don't know, but they've not attempted to really proliferate the books.
Sure.
Aliens has I think it's just Alien. Fuck it. I can never remember. I think it's Alien singular now.
Okay.
Whatever. They've never massively proliferated into a bunch of books. There was a one shot that they did for, I think, the 30th anniversary of the film Aliens that was written by Ben Percy. That was absolutely great. They did an annual issue, and then of course they rolled out a Predator book, which got turned into a miniseries, also Ben Percy, I believe, which was Predator versus Wolverine. But that's as far as they've gone. Like, it's not like there's 3 concurrently running Alien books or something like that. And again,
Yet.
Yeah, right. And I don't think it's Marvel being like, well, we need to protect this brand, right? Like, I don't think it's a concern about brand dilution.
Sure.
I think it's purely that they don't think that there's an appetite for more than one book each.
Sure.
Which is probably true. So
gotcha.
What's wild to me is that these are all nonfiction.
Yeah. These ones are also true.
Oh God.
And
no, don't get into that. I don't want to get into that anymore.
Xenomorphs at the Skinwalker Ranch.
If you want to hear us talk more about conspiracy stuff, you have to check us out on Patreon, where we had a big long conversation that's probably going to go into the Patreon extras. So Kate, tell us about a book that's on the top of your 2023 list.
The best read of the year for me, hands down, was a book that came out this April called Sunshine, a graphic novel by Jarrett J. Krosoczka. It's technically considered a sequel to Hey Kiddo, his first OGN. But you really don't need to read that first. These are just 2 separate time periods in his life. The first one is when he is a younger kid and going through hard times with his family. And this one is about him as a teenager, when he is part of a program that sends high school students to be counselors at a camp for really sick kids and their families. So kids with like cancer and other big major illnesses. And he's really nervous going into it. Like, is this going to be really depressing? Am I going to say the wrong thing? And then you follow him as he kind of learns about this, what is essentially a very separate world of serious childhood illnesses, and bonds with these kids, and has just a fantastic time learning about them, and also bringing them like this freedom of this safe space where they can just be kids and be normal, quote unquote, because all the other kids there are like them, right? And they're always usually the odd ones out. And I love this so much that this is my pick for the recommended reading challenge next year. Can't wait to make all of you bawl your eyes out, cuddle up with the tissues. This one is so good, but it is a 5-alarm snot bomb. So yeah, that was by far the best read for me. Nothing has come close. I had some other great ones, but that was the one that was just like, how those books where you keep thinking of it weeks later. That was this book for me. How about you, Mike?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was. So I cheated this year on our reading challenge in that I read a copy of In, a graphic novel by Will McPhail. Content warning, it does deal with like cancer and family and things of that nature. But yeah, I read that and then snuck it into our reading challenge because I could not get over how like impactful that book was for me. Like reading it really like tore me up in a really good way. It was super relatable. It was just a beautiful book. And so I read it right at the beginning of the year and then snuck it into the reading challenge for this current year. So the book that is probably the best of 2023 for me this year is a book called Girl Juice. When I first read it, it was maybe the funniest book I'd read in a long time. It's the book that I raved about for like 2 weeks in a row. And it kind of follows these 4 girls who live together in this house, kind of focusing mostly on the comically hypersexual Bunny, who is so full of confidence and yet deeply depressed at the same time. as she kind of just does her thing in life and says some of the funniest, most outlandish things I've ever heard in my life, in such a way that I was literally like tearing up with laughter with just some of the panel drops in the way that Nate manages to get through the story to try to lead up to a punchline that is so funny. The last part of this book has this really funny kind of like sequential story that's like 20 or 30 pages long about a haunting inside of this apartment that these 4 girls live in. But you meet these 4 very distinctly different people living together, and they're all friends. And I absolutely love just how over the top and absurd this book is, in a way that is not like gross for the sake of gross, but gross for the sake of real life. Like some of these things are just part of life. When you run out of tampons, or like somebody threw up and didn't flush the toilet, things like that, that people deal with in everyday life. And yeah, I don't know. It's so funny from start to finish. Like I wish that I could go through with you page by page just to read all of the funny bits of this book, because it's just a banger from start to finish. So that's like, I don't know. As much as I would like to pick a book that's probably going to make everybody cry like Kate, I really want to pick a book that's very funny. But yeah, so Girl Juice is amazing. If you get a chance to read it, it's so funny.
I just pulled it up to request it from the library. Is this manga? Looking at the cover, it kind of looks like it could be.
No. It's a Western comic. It's
Okay.
It's, left to right. It has like a very over the top. It looks like it could be a manga book, but it's not.
Okay.
It's just a fun little comic book. Nick, what about you? What's maybe like, of all the books that you've got on your list here, what is like at the very, very top right now?
Ooh.
If it was Alien and we already covered it, that's fine.
No.
I figured there would be something else.
I've actually been really, really pleasantly surprised with The Sacrificers.
Oh my.
And obviously, content warning, some real bad stuff happens to some kids in this book. Although it's like anthropomorphized kids in a fantasy universe. I don't think that makes it any worse, but it's still
doesn't make it any better, that's for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't make it any better. This is by Rick Remender, art by Max Fiumara.
That art.
Yeah, and how do I get at this? It feels like everybody's tried, and Rick Remender's tried several times already to just do a big, broad, spanning fantasy epic series that's massive world building and hyper ambitious and just a real epic of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Epic as in like Lord of the Rings, not as in like Fortnite. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on the vernacular here.
What's the difference, Nick? Because those are the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody thank the bus driver. If you don't get that, that's good. That's good. You're staying out of Fortnite. No, I feel like this book is just, first off, it's beautiful. Second off, super ambitious, but it actually is delivering, and it's managing to just constantly. The issues read so fast, they flow so well. The dialogue and the panels just, I mean, I cut through a book in maybe 5 minutes, and I mean that in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
It flows well, it's engaging, it's exciting. You want to know what happens next. The book is very slowly just giving out little breadcrumbs and introducing you to new characters in a way that doesn't seem overwhelming. It's not lore dumping. It's just slowly getting things out there as you sort of basically follow this core conceit that the people that live in this world have to, I think there's sort of like, I don't know how to describe it, like a lottery. Is that a lottery? I don't remember.
Sort of.
But these kids get selected and they are taken away from their family, and they're, given to this idea that they're going to contribute to the greater good of this society, but no one really knows what happens because they're never seen again. No one ever hears from them again. Like, are they meeting a terrible fate? Are they just living in this big city? No one really knows. And you sort of follow one of these families as the kid is, it's an anthropomorphized pigeon. The kid is taken away,
mm-hmm.
and with all these other children. And I don't want to give any more away. And it would also be another 5 to 10 minutes for me to try to explain any of the rest of the stuff that happens in this book.
Yeah. It is a big, but like you said, it is actually epic in terms of its scale that it's trying to accomplish, like multiple threads with deep rich pieces that are being it fleshed out every single issue. It's like a very impressive thing to be able to do and still have the issue read as quickly as Nick was talking about, right? Like I totally agree. It's like reading issues of A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance, right? Where you're like,
Yeah.
how the hell did I just get through 32 pages so quickly? So much happened, and yet I'm done with it already. Like it was maddening, and that's exactly how this book feels.
Yeah, no, the dialogue in this book is so well crafted and on point,
Hmm.
and it's amazing. I still think about, I think it was issue 3. Literally, the issue is just a bunch of these kids that have been taken away from their families, and they're just sitting in this room together, and they're having a discussion about what they think they've been brought there for,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
why they've been taken away, and what sort of purpose does this kingdom or society have for them. And each of these characters has a different idea of what's going to happen, and it's fascinating because within that idea, they sort of show you their upbringing or their worldviews or sort of the culture that they came from
Hmm.
and how that informs what they think is going to happen. But it's literally just a discussion of a bunch of people basically sitting in a circle. And it was one of the most engaging and fastest reads I've ever thought. And I wouldn't think that would have happened.
Yeah, totally. Kate, did you have another book that you were thinking about as like one of the best you read this year?
So I had several reading kicks this year of like separate things where I just went on a stint of reading a bunch of something because I really liked it. So
Okay,
one of those was I read all of Descender and then all of Ascender back to back. So to say I
yo,
enjoyed those was
Ooh. Phew.
is an understatement. I loved it, especially Ascender. So this is the series by Jeff Lemire, Dustin Nyan, and Steve Wands. And um I don't think I'd say that Ascender is better. I think I am just more of a fantasy person, you know? But
sure,
the
sure.
art is just the gorgeous, gorgeous watercolors. And I was lucky enough that my library just had all of these in paperback and no one was taking them out. So I took them all and just plowed through them
Hell yeah,
one a
dude.
night. And just, oh, it's gorgeous. The story is really well crafted and very interesting.
Hmm.
I got so attached to some of these characters, like the little dog robot. Oh my god. Just
Oh
like
my
my
god.
heart.
Yeah.
And ultimately I liked where it went. Like it wasn't one of these series that like fizzles out, you know? There were some
Hmm.
directions that I wasn't as into or characters I wasn't as into, but it always kept circling back to the really core interesting stuff. And so I thought that was just solid
Hmm.
all the way through.
Dude, I love that book so much.
Yes.
Driller. That's all I'll say.
I
Like
love him so
Driller, a
much.
real killer. Oh my god, fucking! I never thought that like such a simple robot could break my heart so heavily. Like it was unbelievable. Hearing that character's story. I mean, Descender Ascender, incredible series. I totally agree with you, Kay. I understand why that would be up there. I still have yet to finish Ascender though. I think I read one issue and told myself I'd trade wait, and then I never went back to it. So I think this is the kick that I need.
I'm glad I trade weighted on these because it is a series that I don't think I could have kept track of everything well month to month. But yes, go back and read Ascender, Mike. You gotta.
Okay.
Also, I'm pretty sure at this point you can just get it like free on Hoopla
Yeah.
for all of these because it's old enough image stuff.
Oh no, I think in the Comixology site's going away forever sale that they did, I did end up buying like so many books to be like, I'm gonna get all these for really cheap, and I think Ascender was one of those books. I just think I need to go
Oh, is
back
that
and
sale
read.
still going?
No, this is
I should have done
back
that.
in the day. This is before they shut down Comixology.com.
Okay.
And I promise, folks, we're gonna do I think a special Patreon episode that's all about like the end of Comixology. I think we're gonna do that for December. So if you're not signed up, now would be the time because we're gonna drop that right before the end of the year. So, small little plug there. Let me talk about one other book really quick because I will say. For today's episode, Kate, Nick, and I kind of just said like, all right, let's just make a huge list and talk about it. And I had to filter down from my 137 of 2071 rows in this spreadsheet that I have. That seems like more than I actually read this year. I don't think I read 2,000 rows or 2,000 books, but I did have 137 5-star reviews. So I did read. I'll just briefly go over some of the books that are like ongoing that had mixed reviews, not all 5 stars. As I was reading them by issue or chapter by chapter. One Piece is up there, obviously, because some of those issues are great and some of those chapters are not great. Kaiju number 8, consistently like 4s and 5s. That book rules. If you haven't read Kaiju number 8 and you're looking for a really cool kaiju book that's like half mecha, half kaiju, Kaiju number 8 is awesome. Indigo Children is up there. I had like first issue really kicked ass, the second issue not so much, the third issue was great, fourth issue okay, fifth issue great. Like, it's a really up and down book for me. Clobberin' Time. This is a series by Steve Skroce that was all about the Thing interacting with like random people across the Marvel universe with this unbelievable art issue to issue. I think if you're looking for like a really cool miniseries that's just like runs the gamut of the Marvel universe and focuses around everyone's favorite character, the Thing, this book totally rules. Clobberin' Time by Steve Skroce. Plus the art, you will lose your mind with the detail put into this book. It's one of those things where we all, I think, sometimes see stories like Clobberin' Time and we wonder, why doesn't Marvel let people just randomly run with a book for 5 to 10 issues every once in a while like this? And I'm sure there's a reason. It's time and money and whatever, but like getting books like this every once in a while, like Clobberin' Time, is so fun. So if you're looking for just a cool like OGN that's all, or 5-chapter series that's all by one person, they did the writing, the drawing, the art, Clobberin' Time's up there. And then I think the best books that I read this year that were single issues were The Enfield Gang Massacre. This is by Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips. It's a Western book about a gang that was apparently murdered by the town's chief of police slash this Texas Ranger. We really don't know the complete details of it, but we know that they all died. And so we get their story as to what actually happened is in the fiction of this world and this made up town and county of Texas. Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips also worked on that Texas Blood, which I read this year. Amazing book. But if you're looking for like a really cool little Western, I know we've screamed about it from the mountaintops on this podcast, but that's definitely up there with Swan Songs by W. Maxwell Prince and a handful of different artists that he's worked on in that series so far. The last issue hasn't come out yet, but as I said on the show, I think last week, it's going to be a freaking Ice Cream Man tie-in, which is the most exciting part of this entire series as far as I'm concerned, because it means that Nick and I can then talk about a different series that isn't Ice Cream Man as part of our Ice Cream Man miniseries that we've been doing for like 4 years now, which is crazy. But yeah, Swan Songs has been great because it's been a combination of extremely anxiety-inducing depression while also being a bright light of shining hope at this in multiple issues. And I don't know how W. Maxwell Prince is able to do it, but each issue for me has been 5s, just 5 bangers across the board. So I'm just going to throw those out there really quick, just because my list is huge. I have like 20, 30 books almost on the list. So I don't know, Nick, Kate, did you guys have maybe one more book we can talk about, or maybe whatever you've got on your list if you want to go through them really quickly before we wrap up this episode?
My other main reading kick was Joe Sacco OGNs. So content warning for all the content warnings of war crimes and atrocities and all the horrible things that happen in war zones and refugee camps, including sexual assault and gore and, the things.
Whoa.
And yeah, after that, I went on a nothing but cheerful kick, surprisingly. But
Okay.
man, these are so, so good. And extra interesting stuff, especially his stuff on Palestine, given the recent conflict, and gives a lot of interesting context. And I just love the way. So he's an investigative journalist, right? And the way he goes about telling these stories with himself in the story as the journalist is really interesting to me. And they are massive punches to the gut, because it turns out reading about what happened in Bosnia during the Bosnian War is depressing as shit. But
Yeah.
is still really fascinating and really, really well done. There's a reason he's won so many
Hmm.
major awards for these.
Wow, I never heard of this guy before, which is crazy. But it sounds like this is something I need to read. I'm going to probably check out his Palestine book because I didn't know that he did one about that.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
So they're all nonfiction. So they're definitely,
right? A lot,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, Nick, any last few mentions before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'll go through a few quick hits here that didn't get mentioned
Mhm.
earlier. Kaya by Wes Craig. Look, it's Wes Craig. I don't need to say anything more. He's such a powerhouse. He's so great. Um, in Hell We Fight. I understand why people maybe sort of were a little cool to this. It's true. John Layman plugs every single one of his books like it's the best and the last, and the greatest thing he's ever done. And it's the most wonderful thing he's ever done. And it's his most heartbreaking work of shattering genius. And I get it. Like the man's hustling. That's
Mhm,
fine.
mhm.
So I understand that when he does this all the time, I think people sometimes kind of ignore it. But honestly, In Hell We Fight is the most fun book he's done in a long time, with Jock on art. This is confusingly Jock without a C.
Right, different jock.
Jock on art, as just this fun, crazy romp through literally hell itself. The art is really interesting. It's a looser line work style. I would definitely recommend that book. If we want to talk about one of the most beautiful books I've read that I did not understand and will probably require 3 to 4 more readings, I would say Mr. Mammoth by Matt Kint with Jean-Denis Pendon. Probably attempted to get that right, still probably got it wrong. Absolutely beautiful graphic novel from Flux House, which is Matt Kint's imprint at Dark Horse, where he takes $7 or $8 from my wallet every month with a 30-page issue, and I complain about it every month on this show, and I still buy the fucking books.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm the chump, Matt. That Texas Blood already brought up. Where Monsters Lie. I can't recommend Where Monsters Lie enough. Obviously, it's about serial killers. There's some pretty dark stuff here. Kind of the idea of what do all these serial killers do in their downtime? How do they keep on the lowdown? It turns out that's because they live in a gated private community
Right.
where they all live
And,
together.
and the bit of that book is that, like, what if all of the serial killers from like movies and different things were like real people that
Yes.
had to live their life and survive between the movies themselves? Like, it's kind of a funny conceit.
Yeah, it really takes on a new meaning for just how terrifying a homeowners association can be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not even a bit. That's in the book.
Yes. And for me, Kyle Starks, obviously known for being a funny man, which is such a difficult thing to do in comics. For me, I haven't read his Rick and Morty, and some of his other funny stuff has kind of been more miss than hit. But this year, between Where Monsters Lie and also, what is it called? I Hate This Place. Fuck This
Yeah, fuck
Place.
this place. I hate this
Hate
place. Yeah,
this place. This absolutely knocked it out of the park with both of those
agreed.
books as books that are both genuinely scary and genuinely action packed, but also has humor elements involved.
Yeah.
Absolutely stellar work with both of those. And then I would say Hunger in the Dusk by G. Willow Wilson.
Oh,
Um,
the
when they gonna get
yeah,
together? When they gonna
yeah,
get together? When is it gonna happen?
yeah.
I keep reading every issue. When is it gonna
Right.
happen?
It's like the perfect fantasy, like high fantasy book that also has like the most obvious will they won't they thing in the middle of it. It's so good. It's so good.
Well, it's not even will they won't they. It's
When
they
when
will.
will they
When will
yeah,
this
yeah.
happen?
I feel like it's so funny because I feel like there's like between this book and the series that Marjorie Liu just put out really recently with Sana Takeda. But
Hmm.
they took a break from Monstrous to put out these like 2 or 3 book series. Like there's some really 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 good high fantasy stuff out there right now, and I'm loving it, like absolutely loving it. If I had the mental fortitude to sit down and read all of Monstrous in a couple of sittings, I would definitely do it. But that book is
Ooh,
so jam packed with data. I'm like, I can only read
so
one
many
book
characters.
every like
So many
couple of months.
characters.
But I
Mhm.
really love it. I really love the just the beauty of everything, and like saying you can do this in comics the same way that a Brandon Sanderson or whoever else can do it in novels.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
love that they're doing that. And I think the new series is also like that too. Like it's just heavy with all of that the fantasy stuff. But I haven't read it yet. But I'm glad that books like this are out there because I definitely buy them. I just haven't read them yet. But I
Yeah.
know I want to support them because I absolutely love that stuff is coming out, and I really do want to read them.
Yeah. The last one for me, and just to be brief, because I talked about this a ton. I think the last time I was on the show, just Petrolhead. Yes, I get it. There's only 2 issues out. I realize I'm that guy, right? Like issue 2 just dropped, and I'm
Uh-huh.
like best of the year, best of the year. Like I'm that guy. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, but what a colorful book! What a great art style! Genuinely an all ages book that really delivers for all readers. It doesn't compromise, trying to, make it more kid friendly or trying to like sneak in double entendres like a Pixar movie so that it, um, appeals to multiple audiences. It genuinely is an all ages book that's a lot of fun. It deals with some slightly, broader topics that we're tackling with right now in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And look, they fucking dropped a Christmas issue for December. Okay, like when
I
you
mean,
can pull that
was it a
off,
Christmas
all right?
issue though, Nick? I mean, it had a Christmas cover. I'll say that.
Yeah, yeah, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. What a great book!
Yeah.
Just really fun, really beautiful, great action. Just that 2000 AD cynical look at the future where it's like, yeah, we've got robots, but we all still hate each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, that book rules.
I can't recommend the book enough.
Let's see. Well, let me just throw out like 2 more books and then I'll wrap us
Yeah.
up here. I also read, and I love this book. Uh, And you know what? If you didn't like this book, send us an email, ircbpodcast@gmail.com. But I
Okay.
read Batman One Bad Day, The Riddler, #1. Maybe the edgelordiest book that I've read in a while, but in a good way. I really love this book
Okay.
from the sense that like Danny who's prooflessing right now is pulling up the hardcover right in front of us. That book is so good. Like it definitely takes the David Fincher approach of like hyper everything and puts it into a comic book. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I watched The Killer recently, but I thought about this book or I thought about like Fight Club and Memento and those movies that all seem to inspire these like super edgelordy type of movies and comics these days. But I feel like Tom King takes the edge off of some of that to a certain extent. And I think Mitch Gerads just like nailed the story, nailed everything about like the way that things are supposed to look, inserting celebrities into character pieces, which I totally love. Like John Hamm is Batman for him, and I kind of just love that. So I don't know. That book was really good. It really impressed me. For like 92 pages or something like that, it's totally worth the hardcover price, I think, of like $17. But yeah, I really, really like that. And I also liked Numb to This. This is by Kindred Neely. Big old warning about this book. It is about school shootings and violence and against, younger people and children. But I think, Kate, if I'm not mistaken, you turned me on to this book.
Yeah, it was one of the books that I was gonna read, and then I read as like I talked about it on the show as like the next thing I wanted to read, and then
Yeah.
I finished reading really depressing stuff, and I was like, no,
Yeah.
no, I need a palate cleanser.
Dude, no, that's the thing. This book, I read it. I got it from the library, and I came home and I let it sit on the table for a couple days. And finally, I was like, all right, I should actually get around to read this because it seems like it's an important book, especially what was happening at the time when I got it. And so I read it, and I like bawled at my table, like not because of like the tale of the story or necessarily, which I don't know, maybe that makes me sound like callous, but the fact that like the way that Neely talks about her own personal frustration with the fact that something like school shootings could happen over and over and over again just like overwhelmed me to the point where I just was like, this is like it's like a paralyzing, this is so unfair that continues to happen. And I think she totally just nails the feeling and in the way that she describes and shows everything. And she I think pays a really strong attention to be very caring about talking about this subject. Not only because she was involved in like an active school shooting had happened at her school, but like the way that she approaches how she kept seeing these things over and over and over in the media, and it broke her heart every single time, is so careful, is really good. Totally broke my heart, but like what an amazing book for someone to put out to raise awareness for just this plague that is happening in America. Um, yeah, I don't know. I really appreciate you recommending it to me, but it totally did like destroy me for a day.
I'll read it after I have like the newest Babysitters Club graphic novel out, and like
Yeah,
I'll do that, and then I'll be ready.
right. A little honey, little vinegar,
Yep.
right? The last book I want to talk about before we wrap up here is I just literally last night read Parasocial by Alex DeCampi and Erica Henderson. Holy shit, guys. Holy shit. Is this one of the best books that was published in recent history? Like, Alex DeCampi not only nails this comic, but the back matter of this hardcover is some of the most like I'm not gonna tiptoe around the problems that I have in the comic industry. I'm going to call people out by name. I'm going to talk about the problems that we have in this industry, not only with like the way that fans and creators interact, but also the people who like are the problem in comics. And I thought, one, super bold of her, and two, like the comic reads unbelievably well. Like it's such a beautiful book from start to finish. The parasocial relationship between our main character, this good looking man from an old sci-fi show, and the people who are obsessed with him is so well done. DeCampi says in the back matter that some of the stuff that she mentions in this book is like verbatim phrases that she's heard in real life, right? No person or thing is really based around anything, any particular subject, but she takes, the amalgamation of fandom and the amalgamation of things that create fandom and then turns it into a story. So yeah, if you haven't had a chance to read this, it's worth your money. It's worth to have on your shelf. Such a good story. And the back matter is incredible. Between her and Erica DeCampi's writing and Henderson's writing, you get a full look into this book, and I loved it. Loved every single page of it. Can't recommend it enough. So I guess that's the show this week. Unless you guys had any final thoughts, anything you're looking forward to in 2024. I know that's a on the spot question, but yeah, I'm glad that we all read so many good comics this year. Like this list that we talked about today is longer in our notes. So I'm glad that we had the chance to read more really good comics this year, guys. I think with that, though, we will wrap things up. Next week and the week after, we're going to have 2 minisodes coming out from Paul and Kate and Zach, Kate Lamphere. They're going to be talking about their interests outside of comics, ... I'm really excited to hear these episodes because I haven't listened to them myself yet. But I'm confident that with Paul and Kate and Zach in charge, it's going to be really, really good. It sounds to me like they had an incredible time recording these episodes, so I hope you enjoy them as well. I know they're going to be talking about wrestling. I know they're going to be talking about knitting. There's probably going to be a bunch of other stuff, so get yourself hyped for those 2 episodes. And then we're going to be back in 2024. It's going to be the beginning of the lead up to episode 400. It's going to be me and Kate and Paul. We're going to be talking about the beginning of year 9 of IRCB, what we're looking forward to in the year, and so much more. So look forward to that. So yeah, I guess to wrap things up, Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. Xander makes tea when it gets cold. Just knock on the door. He'll let you have a cup. I don't know. I want to say thank you to Kate and Nick for this episode. Thank you for Danny for being our proof listener today. Thank you to everyone hanging out with us in the Discord chat. You are fantastic human beings. And if you got this far in the show, you are also a fantastic human being. Thank you for listening to us just ramble and do all sorts of wild stuff this past year and the past freaking 8 years of this show. Yeah, I want to say thank you again. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.